It is homecoming week in Bloomington, and the stakes could not be higher for what waits on the other side. Hello and welcome to IU Sports Sunday. He's Ben Howler. I'm Nick Rodecap, and Ben, a chaotic day of college football yesterday across not only the Big Ten, but the entire country, and it may have some implications for Indiana down the stretch. Oregon, a thrilling win over Ohio State in Eugene. Indiana goes out to Columbus later on this season, but first they'll have to contend with Nebraska, and we can finally say that it's game week, and it feels good.
Yeah, a lot of teams losing yesterday. Indiana through 7 weeks now undefeated. And look, this is just a year in college football. And it feels like we say this every year, that this year there's just more parity than the last, but I think it's especially reigns true for this year. It's hard to tell who the best teams are outside of the top five, top six, and it's an interesting year to have a 12-team playoff and an interesting year for Indiana to be 6-0.
It feels like even though, we've expanded the playoff, we've added 8 more teams than there were for the past decade, it still feels like there's going to be somebody that's unhappy. And there's a chance, Indiana, of course, on a bye. They didn't play this week. So they're still undefeated. It's still Indiana and Army, the two teams that have not trailed this season, because Texas trailed for about 5 minutes before they scored 34 unanswered on Oklahoma. Very impressive win for them, by the way. But it still feels like, Indiana's still in that college football playoff conversation, because obviously they didn't have a chance to lose. But they definitely have their biggest test coming up this weekend. Fox Big Noon kickoff will be here in Bloomington when the Hoosiers host Nebraska. And depending on what happens with the AP poll, I know you can't put too much stock in rankings, but when Nebraska comes to town, there's a chance they might be ranked. Some of the lower-ranked teams lost, Utah, and I'm thinking of one more. Illinois almost lost. They should have lost. Did you see the end of that Purdue game? It was
yeah, that was Big Ten football at its finest.
Yeah.
Oklahoma at 18 also lost, but it was to the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah, and that really, if anything else, just kind of speaks to the talent gap between number 18 and number 1, and that kind of makes me worried for when Indiana goes to Columbus. And I know it's a month away. It's like 5 or 6 weeks away when Indiana plays Ohio State, but even though Ohio State lost that game, very, very obvious that they are one of the most complete teams in the country. Talent-wise, coaching-wise, I know, people can criticize Ryan Day a little bit because, he played another big game. But, man, losing by 1 point on the road in one of the toughest places to play in college football, you're never happy with a loss. But definitely a lot to like about Ohio State, even though, they're not undefeated anymore. I think it's going to be a very, very tough test for Indiana in late November.
Yeah, it's interesting for Ohio State. Look, they're a team that Indiana's best chance to beat Ohio State, if I'm really being honest, is if they drop 1 or 2 more games here, fly under the radar. I think if Indiana walks into Columbus on second to last week of the season with a number next to their name, a ranking in the AP poll, I think that's just not going to go well, because that's the only way Ohio State has really lost the last few years. It's either against really, really good teams on the road, like Oregon, or it's against some of those teams that just fly under the radar. Ohio State usually has one slip-up game. Sometimes they lose it. Sometimes it's just really close to a loss. But if Indiana walks into that winning these next 4 games and is sitting at like 15 in the AP poll, that's not going to go well.
I think if Indiana wins their next 4, I think they'll be higher than 15.
Yeah, I was just spitballing there.
Yeah, but Indiana right now, entering this bye week, I think was 18th in the country. They will probably go up a couple spots. Pitt, also an interesting case. Now, Pitt, I believe, was ranked lower than Indiana. They barely squeaked by Cal, and they needed a lot of help to do it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when the AP poll comes out here later today. But I want to shift to Indiana-Nebraska. The Hoosiers host the Huskers. Sold out. And a lot of Nebraska fans are saying, oh, you're welcome. And we've talked about it. A lot of people know that Nebraska's fan base travels as well as anybody in the country. But, speaking from experience, we've done the drive from Nebraska to Indiana and, round trip there and back. It's very
riveting
boring.
drive.
Oh, it's
very fun.
Yeah, if by fun you mean
windmill.
A great cure for insomnia. To say the least.
You're driving about 5 hours from West Iowa to East Iowa, and once you get in there, you have no idea where in Iowa you are. It all looks the same, even when you drive through the air quotes bigger cities.
Yeah. I mean, the only real landmark is the giant truck stop.
And we didn't get to stop there, unfortunately.
Tragic. But yeah, it's a boring drive. So if there are a bunch of Nebraska fans making that drive, I want to personally salute them and offer them hypothetical financial compensation. I'll give them a couple pennies that I find between my couch cushions. But the fact remains, Indiana selling out this game. The weather's going to be perfect. Fox Big Noon kickoff. Gus Johnson is going to be here, which I don't think anybody had on their bingo card at the start of the season. This is the biggest Indiana game since Nebraska. Biggest Indiana game since Cincinnati 2021, when Nebraska comes to town this weekend. And, you were at that game. You said that the concession staff ran out of water.
Yeah, I don't know. I never knew that was a thing, but yes, that's what happened.
That's absurd to think about, but I feel like they'll be a little more prepared this time around. And if Nebraska re-enters the AP Top 25, this will be the first ranked game between two ranked teams at Memorial Stadium with fans in attendance since November 20th, 1993.
I was not alive for that.
And it was under Bill Mallory the last time Indiana played as a ranked team against a ranked opponent at Memorial Stadium with fans in attendance. And it's absurd to think about because that was a long time ago. So much has changed since then, but we look at Nebraska's resume. And, a lot of people will talk about who has Indiana played, right? Because, Indiana, let's be honest, FIU is okay. They're not great. Western Illinois, one of the worst teams in the country. UCLA, I mean, they took Minnesota down to the wire last night at the Rose Bowl, but ultimately fell to the Gophers. How about them? Upsetting USC and then falling into a trap game almost on the West Coast. Charlotte, not very good, although they had an impressive win against East Carolina a couple weeks ago. Maryland and then Northwestern. And it was really interesting. Northwestern dominated Maryland in College Park, which I think is good for Indiana because that makes Indiana's win in Evanston look a little more impressive given what the Northwestern offense was able to do against the Terrapins.
Yeah, that was a weird game. I think it was one where you're probably not going to see Maryland play a worse game all year long. But it's two teams that Indiana's played. You get the advantage, I guess, that Indiana went and played Northwestern on the road. And that's going to help them out a lot. Yeah, but it was a weird day of Big Ten football. And the 3 Big Ten games played for Indiana so far. These next 6, they're all very telling teams. 2 of them come on the road against 2 teams one team that probably should not be a win. Another team that should be a win. But again, any road test in the Big Ten's hard. Michigan State's a decent atmosphere. And then 4 home games against one pretty terrible team who, hey, had a nice week against Illinois. And then 3 teams who were all very – I saw a tweet yesterday. I don't know if I agree with it, but it was like the Big Ten is 1, 2, 3. It's Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. And then there's a bottom 3. And then everybody else, the other 12 teams, are all jumble in the middle.
Yeah.
But those are 3 you're playing 3 games at home against teams that are in that jumble.
And the thing about college football is that, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the idea that you can gauge a team's talent and a team's success off of like relative victories, off of transitive victories. Well, we beat them and they beat this team, so we're better than this team. It doesn't really work because, I mean, look at what happened to Alabama when they went to Nashville and played Vanderbilt as the number 1 team in the country. You'd think it would have been an easy win, but there's a reason games aren't played on paper. And Indiana facing Nebraska this coming weekend. Nebraska has one of the more talked about quarterbacks in the country in Dylan Raiola. And he's kind of hard to gauge because
Patrick Mahomes Jr.?
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes. Some people call him Patrick Mapartments, Patrick Macondos, because he's not a home yet. He's not that developed. He's not that fleshed out. Very raw, true freshman quarterback. And Indiana's defense, I think, is going to be looking at that and prepared to, know that they can make a big difference in this game because Dylan Raiola and Nebraska went on the road to Illinois, and he made some questionable decisions down the stretch in that game, took some big sacks in a situation where he really couldn't afford to, and ultimately Nebraska fell to Illinois in overtime. So I think that that's going to be very similar to what we see this weekend. Indiana's defense is fantastic. Jalen Walker banged up a little bit at Northwestern, but that bye week I think is big for him to get healthy and for Indiana as a team to get healthy. And Dylan Raiola, I think, is in for a very tough Saturday afternoon when Nebraska comes to Bloomington.
Yeah, it's weird. Nebraska has a really good offensive line. You look at their run game, and it's not terrible. Indiana's front seven, we talked about a lot on this show, is the most surprising part about this football team so far. So that's the battle I'm looking for, that battle up front. I think Indiana, this might be their toughest test up front.
Yeah, definitely. We're talking Indiana sports on this Sunday morning. It's a homecoming weekend that should be one for the ages. Hoosier Hysteria on Friday night, and then Nebraska comes to town on Saturday morning into the afternoon. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on WGCL. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday. It's homecoming weekend in B-Town. I'm Nick Rodecap. He's Ben Haller, and we're talking about Indiana hosting Nebraska this weekend. And Ben, we talked about it a little bit before the break, but it's not that Nebraska doesn't have a run game. It's just that the Big Ten is so top-heavy, and there are so many teams that have put up impressive numbers on the ground. Nebraska has rushed for over 130 yards per game, which puts them, believe it or not, in the middle of the pack. And that's kind of strange because usually you're over 100 rushing yards per game. You're doing something right.
Yeah, I don't think it says anything bad about Nebraska. We talked about before the break, they have a very good run game. Their offensive line is very good. They have given up a decent amount of sacks this year, which is interesting. But I think that there's an argument to be made. Look, Indiana hasn't played the best teams within the Big Ten this year, yes. Even within that, they have not played very good offensive line yet. The best unit up front they've played is maybe Northwestern offensive line or UCLA defensive line. This is why I'm really excited for this test, is because we finally get to see some of these James Madison transfers, a lot of them in the front seven, get fully tested. I mean, that's one of the best parts of this Nebraska team. I think if they can show some dominance in this game, there are not a lot of teams in the Big Ten where they're going to get beat up front by.
Yeah, and you think about the JMU transfers who came over and have basically just been game wreckers on the defensive side. Mikhail Kamara, one of them. And I remember before the Maryland game, he was kind of talking about how he had a chip on his shoulder because he wanted Maryland to recruit him, and they kind of overlooked him. And that's kind of the story for a lot of these JMU guys because James Madison, obviously, relatively speaking, is very new to the FBS.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're on the map now in large part because their fans think that Indiana is James Madison West and that James Madison deserves all the credit, which is not true. But a lot of these guys kind of have that chip on their shoulder, that underdog mentality. And on the other side, you look at Nebraska, and Nebraska is a program that, you know, they allegedly have sold out 400 straight home games. Now, I don't really believe that those actually were all attended by a capacity crowd. But Nebraska's been kind of middling over the last few years, but they've still got that historical prestige. And you talked about the sacks that Dylan Raiola has taken. And I think it's sometimes not so much an indictment on the offensive line as if the quarterback, you know, holds the ball too long or tries to do too much. And I think that's where he might run into trouble this weekend because Mikhail Kamara, prior to yesterday, was tied for the Big Ten lead in sacks with 5. I'm looking forward to watching him work against an offensive line of Nebraska's caliber. I think that's going to be a very intriguing matchup. And whichever team I think wins up front, I mean, it sounds cliche, but we talked about it. Well, I guess Dan Lanning talked about it in Oregon's game over Ohio State. It's all about establishing physicality up front. I think the crowd is going to play a huge part in that for Indiana.
Well, I think the great thing about Indiana's defensive line, I mean, look, they're so deep. And the reason that depth helps, it helps in a couple of different ways. Number one, if you're a college football team and you're an offensive line coach and you're trying to come up with a game plan going into a week, there's usually one guy where you say, okay, no matter what the scheme is, no matter what the blocking pattern is on this specific play, there's always one guy you want to double team or at least hit twice. it's hard to, obviously Kamara is going to be that one guy for Indiana, but then there are other guys who are probably deserving of that through the first 6 games at least, that might get some one-on-one opportunities that could help them a decent amount. The other thing that depth helps with, defensive line is probably the most rotated position in college football. Actually, definitely is the most rotated position in college football. I mean, a lot of times they're splitting drives off and on. They have a lot of different guys, not just in their starting defensive line, but on their second string defensive line that could come in and still make an impact. Also, the ends are very good for Indiana. We talked about Mikael Kamara being tied for the Big Ten lead in sacks. The interior defensive line is also, for an interior defensive line, obviously very good run-stopping team, but also pretty good pass rush. Look at James Carpenter getting a couple sacks a couple of weeks ago over Maryland. That doesn't happen a whole lot for interior defensive linemen unless your name's Aaron Donald. But
one of the greatest to ever play the game.
Yeah, it's a very, very deep defensive line.
And you talk about the interior linemen, sort of the unsung heroes on both sides of the ball, because on the offensive side for Indiana, I mean, over 200 rushing yards per game. I don't care who you play, if you can sustain that consistency, that level of running prowess, it's so hard to stop. And it's not like Indiana has an Ashton Genty in the backfield.
No one
Genty,
does,
the
except for
Heisman
Boise
favorite.
State.
Yeah, and we can't clone him, unfortunately, but that would be awesome if we could. But no, Indiana does it. No, I wouldn't say by committee, but really it's Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton at the front. Both of them over 300 rushing yards this season. Lawton, averaging 4.8 yards per carry, which is fantastic. And then you look at Ellison, over 6 yards per carry this season. It's absurd. He's shifty. He's quick. He can run it between the tackles, or he can bounce it outside and get 15 yards out of seemingly nothing. I think, just like we're talking about how Indiana, maybe hasn't really had a big test up front. I mean, Nebraska, outside of maybe Illinois, and I will say it was very impressive what they did against Rutgers and being able to hold Kyle Monangai out of the end zone. Haven't allowed a rushing touchdown yet this season, but it's, there's a lot of, okay, how much stock can we really put into what's happened so far? It's very exciting that this is the first big test, the first high-profile test, really, for both of these teams, and I'm excited to get to Saturday. It's going to be really fun. So we look at what else Nebraska can do on the offensive side, and Dylan Raiola, top 10 in the Big Ten in completion percentage. Not going to light up the stat sheet, really, with his passing yards. I mean, through the air, it's not that impressive. 226 yards per game, which, again, top 10. But when you compare him to Curtis Rourke, I mean, these guys couldn't be more different when you think about it. Rourke, old man, veteran, savvy. Raiola, young, raw. It's got to be advantage Rourke, right?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the biggest things that helps Rourke, now, don't get me wrong, I think as a quarterback as a whole, Curtis Rourke's still better, but I also think Curtis Rourke just has better weapons. I think that's one of the things that's just people kind of gets lost in the shuffle when you're talking about how good quarterbacks are and comparing them and talking about maybe Will Howard being a really good quarterback. We saw yesterday that even though you have a lot of weapons, doesn't always automatically mean you're going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. But Curtis Rourke has done exactly what he's needed to do with those weapons. And in large part, I think he's made the weapons better. I mean, you look at some of the guys, you're coming into the year, you look at some numbers, and it was like, it's hard to say that 5 different guys would have these kind of numbers, but it's just kind of like they're just switching off. It's switching off and on between every game. I mean, look at that Northwestern game. Miles Price, Miles Cross, who had arguably, outside of Surratt, been the best 2 receivers in the first 5 weeks, barely did anything against Northwestern. It was like 1 or 2 catches each. And other guys step up. Keyshawn Williams has come out of nowhere and made a name for himself. I mean, when you have that many options, it really helps your quarterback out.
And Keyshawn Williams, I mean, he's somebody who, he can catch short yardage passes in the red zone, or he can do what he did on just a simple crossing pattern, break a couple tackles and blast 50 yards down the field. I mean, that kind of versatility. It's like Indiana, they lost Donovan McCulley, and it doesn't even matter. And if you would have said that 12 months ago, there's no way that anyone would have believed you, because McCulley was the best receiver pound for pound on that team. a year ago. But it's impressive, the depth that Indiana has on both sides of the ball, and it definitely feels like that lends itself to an advantage for the Hoosiers. We're talking IU sports on this Sunday morning. Hoosiers host Nebraska 6 days until kickoff. Probably the biggest game in Bloomington in the last 3 years. More on the other side of this break. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday. Indiana hosting Nebraska this weekend. Of course, they had the weekend off, so we'll go around the Big Ten. Of course, the thrilling game against Oregon and Ohio State last night on NBC. Number 2 and number 3 went at it. Oregon won by 1 point. And Ben Haller, it feels like Ohio State and Oregon, I mean, the winner of that game is going to be dubbed the best team in the conference, and Oregon was able to come out on top in the end in a thrilling game, and really feels like now they're certainly a frontrunner to be in Indianapolis in December.
Yeah, look, Oregon obviously takes home the win and probably, like you said, is now the favorite to win the Big Ten. They're going to finish the season undefeated most likely. I think last night what we saw in the Ohio State-Oregon game is that Ohio State is the best team in the Big Ten. It's always tough to go on the road. What's that stat about Big Ten teams traveling 2 different time zones, and Indiana's like the only win this year? There's
State.
2 now that Penn State won, but well, Penn State had a trap. Never mind. I had that stat wrong. But Penn State, yeah.
They technically won the game, but
it's close.
Yeah.
But look, Ohio State, to go on the road like that to Oregon, lose by 1, they had it in their hands. It was the reason they lost trying to close out that game was, what was it, an offensive pass interference call?
OPI, and then Will Howard slid in the middle of the field with no time on the clock.
I mean, that was one play with 43 yards left, but the OPI pushed them out of field goal range. A 15-yard penalty, they were sitting at like the 28.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have made it a 45-yard field goal, which is doable for pretty much any college kicker. They're just all around really good. Their defense had some shaky spots yesterday, but their offense is doing better. I thought in those big games, Ohio State was going to have very low-scoring games against some of those better teams. I think if they find themselves in a semifinals national championship game against Texas, it's going to be low-scoring. Against Oregon, it's going to be low-scoring. This one kind of surprised me with how many points were on the board.
Well, the spirit of the Pac-12 lives on.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You killed the man, but not the idea of Pac-12 after dark. And it definitely feels like Oregon, I mean, they were well equipped. Every time Ohio State punched, Oregon punched back. And a phenomenal game, definitely a candidate for game of the year. I really don't, I mean, it sucks because one team had to lose. But you're right. I think Ohio State, they were driving really on that final drive, and then the penalty just kind of derailed it. And I mean, we had a lot of thrilling games in the Big Ten yesterday. Another one in Southern California. You just talked about it a little bit. Penn State barely squeaks by USC at the Coliseum. They needed overtime to do it. And I mean, Penn State, it still seems like to me, you can't trust them in a big game. And I know USC being unranked, they might be better than their record indicates. I mean, they've had a couple tough games. Penn State, they played LSU early in the season and barely squeaked by in that one as well. But USC, coming off a loss to Minnesota, returns home and takes Penn State down to the wire. And if it hadn't been for a couple no calls, that game might have played out a little differently. It still feels like Penn State is kind of, good but not great when it comes to handling business, in big, high-profile games.
It just feels like Penn State is how they always are, and that's going to be that lower top 10 team. They're going to sit around 8 to 10 in the polls all year, and usually that means making a New Year's Six bowl. This year, that'll mean making the playoffs. I don't really know if they're going to do much in the playoffs, though. Look, Drew Aller's actually he's catching a lot of hate, but he had a pretty good day yesterday, 30 for 43, almost 400 yards and a couple of touchdowns. They're another offense that's pretty talented. Their defense, though, look, Indiana's favorite, Tom Allen-led defense, I think it was maybe one of the more overrated parts of the team going in the middle of the season. The secondary has just struggled to this point in the year. But Penn State's a team to me, it's just everyone talks about, when they talk about a lot of times this is just a bailout for talking about a bad team, calling a team, low floor, high ceiling, saying they have a lot of potential. Penn State the last 5 years has felt like a high floor, low ceiling kind of team. Like, you know what you're going to get with Penn State.
9-3, 10-2.
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And to go on the win, though, at USC, they showed a little bit that they at least do belong in that top 10.
Yeah, it's a question of where in
Yeah.
the top 10.
Yeah,
I think
that's
you're
true.
right. I think it is definitely on the lower tier. And, I mean, we saw it with Kalen DeBoer, Alabama, South Carolina. And I think some people in the national media try to spin that game being so close as, oh, look at the parity in the SEC. I don't know, because South Carolina got walloped by Ole Miss, and that's what a top tier team is supposed to do against a struggling team like South Carolina. But I mean, that onside kick, South Carolina is a 2-point conversion away from tying that game, and my point is that Kalen DeBoer came from Indiana, Tom Allen came from Indiana to Penn State. I think you can take the coach out of Indiana, but I don't know that you can take the Indiana out of the coach. It feels like sometimes they're going to underperform. This is the previous staff I'm talking about. They're going to underperform when they shouldn't. When they should handle business against lower tier opponents, they're not going to. And when, Tom Allen was here, by the end of things, there weren't a lot of lower tier opponents. But you think back to when Kalen DeBoer was the offensive coordinator here in that 2019 season, Indiana up 22-8 over Tennessee in their bowl game. Obvious onside kick situation, and everybody but the head coach knew it was coming. Those kinds of things I feel like have carried over. And, I mean, Penn State made Miller Moss look really good yesterday. Miller Moss, and credit to him, too, dicing up a top 5 defense like he did. He made some great throws in that game. Ultimately, USC fell just short, and Illinois and Purdue, that game, ridiculous. Purdue, 40 points between the third and fourth quarters, an additional 6 in overtime. Purdue tried to do what Indiana did against Penn State in 2020, go for 2 to end the game, instead of kicking the PAT to tie and keep playing in overtime. But Purdue, starting their backup quarterback, almost upset Illinois in Champaign. I mean, that would have been catastrophic for Illinois, no?
Yeah, that's such the tough thing about college football. It's one of the few sports where you actually do look at margin of victory and the eye test. And still, even though they won the game, this does not bode well for them for any chance they had at whether it was the playoffs or whatever, getting a really good ball game. They just looked flat. I mean, their defense has not been this bad in any of their games so far this year.
And they, Purdue, I mean, this is a fan base in West Lafayette that is teetering on the edge of wanting Ryan Walters gone.
They're not teetering on the edge of anything.
And I'm trying to give them a little bit of slack. I mean, there are some people who are going to be like, oh, well, Ryan Walters, they fought against a very good Illinois team. I don't know if Purdue fought so much as Illinois outcoached and outplayed themselves.
Yeah.
And it was almost a collapse of this. It was a collapse of the century. Illinois needed a field goal as time expired to send that game to overtime. I just don't know. I know there's on paper no such thing as a bad win. Like, you'd rather win ugly than lose pretty. But I don't see how you can keep Illinois ranked in, given what happened. I mean, this was in Champaign, and I know Purdue has historically had Illinois' number in Champaign. But I feel like good teams handle business against bad teams. We've seen Indiana do that. And Indiana, people talk about who have they played. They played a bunch of cupcakes. They played the School for the Blind. You play who's in front of you, and you handle business. And Illinois didn't do that yesterday. I'll tell you who did, though. Iowa. And they're coming off a very, very tough loss against Ohio State. Washington upset Michigan and Seattle, and Iowa just ran away from the Huskies. And we had a controversial missed field goal in that game, or maybe it was good. Nobody really knows. Flashback to the Pinstripe Bowl about 10 years ago. Indiana fans remember that all too well. But, man, Iowa putting up 40 points. I would never have expected that from a team whose offensive struggles, well documented, but they handled business against Washington.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that game. I watched it. Most of that first half, and I never seen an Iowa offense look like that in years.
Yeah.
But look, if Iowa could consistently look, I don't know if it says more about Iowa or Washington, because Washington got that win over Michigan. I don't know how much of an upset it is. Obviously, Michigan's the better ranked team, but I think Washington was actually favored in that game just because they were home field advantage, traveling that far and everything like that. Still, it's funny. Washington goes 40 points, and they still didn't do a ton through the air. Everything's on the ground. Caleb Johnson's having a spectacular season.
Yeah, and Iowa's always been, I think rushing attack and defense. That's their bread and butter. Cade McNamara in this game, and their win over Washington, Iowa, 40-16 over Washington, threw his first touchdown against either a Power 4 or an FBS opponent since 2021 when he was playing for Michigan and threw a touchdown against Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. It's absurd. Like, Cade McNamara, let's be honest, probably not going to be playing on Sundays. I think that's putting it politely.
That's bold.
Yeah, I know, controversial. But Iowa putting up 40 points really without a passing game is impressive. And you look, Washington comes to town the week after Indiana plays Nebraska. Indiana's a team that can, they will run you off the field with the ground game, 200 yards per game on the ground. I think that bodes, obviously, the transitive property doesn't really work in college football, but if Washington's run defense, Caleb Johnson, 166 yards and 2 touchdowns, if Indiana sees that, they're in for what should be a good game against the defending national runner-up, but really in name and logo only, because this is a completely different team in Washington. And another surprise yesterday, Wisconsin over Rutgers, and it's not just that Wisconsin won, it's the way they did it. Rutgers, very low-scoring, close loss to Nebraska last week, and then Wisconsin goes to Piscataway, puts up 42, and holds Rutgers off the board until the fourth quarter. Just, Wisconsin, you thought maybe, they were kind of teetering on the edge of, going in the wrong direction, and then they dominate Rutgers on the road. A really, really impressive win for them. Almost 200 rushing yards for Tawee Walker. That's really impressive.
Yeah, I am very, very ashamed to say that I was kind of high on Rutgers. I thought Kyle Monangai coming into the year would be one of the best running backs in the country, and to his credit, he kind of has been. I think he's been a little disappointing to an extent this year, but man, their defense looks rough. And I knew their offense would have its games, but nothing looked good for them in that loss to Wisconsin. I had not been a big Wisconsin believer either. I really, at Rutgers, had Rutgers taking away this game pretty early in the game, and they lost by 35. That is one of my worst predictions yet.
And, yeah, I wonder, how much of that – Kyle Monangai wasn't awful. 19 for 72 and a touchdown. But Ethan Kaliakmanis, he came over from Minnesota, and you think, like, okay, he's a veteran guy, but hey, he wasn't really anything to write home about in Minnesota. And yesterday, 12 of 32 for 103 and a pick. That's on par with, obviously, apples to oranges, but Josh Allen against Houston, just under, like 30% completion. It's not good for Rutgers, and a disappointing loss for them, especially considering, they were able to play Nebraska so close in a low-scoring game last week. You think Nebraska's a decent offensive team, should be encouraging for your defense, and then the bottom falls out really from the opening kickoff. And questions to answer, I think, for Rutgers, because they're out of the Big Ten East now. So you'd think you'd have a little bit softer schedule, a chance to make some noise, and they've got a lot to fix, and that's evident.
Yeah, I was really trusting them, because it's not that I trusted Iowa or Rutgers that much. It's just that I didn't know who else to put on the top of the Big Ten. And we talk about Indiana overall having a very easy schedule in the Big Ten, and they do, especially with Michigan and Washington now not living up to expectations and definitely not living up to those national championship names. I think arguably Rutgers had an easier schedule. And not even arguably. They definitely had an easier schedule. Rutgers does not play Ohio State. They do not play Oregon, and they do not play Penn State. They don't play any of those three teams. Now, to the credit of Rutgers and Indiana, talking about that schedule, those teams had just got beat down the last 10 years.
Really, they were fighting for scraps for a decade.
Yeah, I mean, you could throw Maryland in there as well. They've had some solid years. Michigan State, outside of their really good years, in there as well. But to have 2 losses already, that is not what I would have expected from Iowa or from Rutgers. Why do I keep saying Iowa when talking about Rutgers? That's twice now. I guess it's because, hey, I didn't think there'd be a world where Rutgers scored 7 points and Iowa scored 40 points. They played pretty similar opponents in Wisconsin and Washington.
Yeah, it's tough because Rutgers, no Ohio State, no Penn State, no Michigan. You're out of the Big Ten East. This is the year that you've got to, do the same kind of thing Indiana's doing and, make some noise. But back-to-back losses after a back-to-back close, 3-point wins, it's tough for them. Rutgers facing the West Coast teams, hosts UCLA, and then goes to USC. And they'll try to turn it around. But Minnesota over UCLA, I know UCLA is 1-5, but you've got to hang your hat on, I think, a little bit, being able to push Minnesota down to the wire, especially considering Minnesota upset USC last week. And UCLA very clearly, I think, still along with Purdue in terms of, clearly at the bottom of the conference. But, I mean, it's tough for Minnesota going west, kind of a trap game because, we talk about, these teams Big Ten teams are 2-10 when traveling 2+ time zones. Indiana and Penn State, the only winners. But Minnesota needed a late touchdown to escape against a team that obviously lost a lot of players in UCLA, and Indiana handled business against pretty handily early on in the season. But there's no such thing as a bad road win in the Big Ten.
No, there's not. I don't think this is as good of a thing for UCLA as you think it is. I don't think Minnesota is very good at all. I think obviously they got that big win last week, but still sitting at 4-3. They're a team that, yikes! I know it's tough to put so much weight into the very beginning of the season, but a 19-17 win over North Carolina,
who has lost
terrible.
4 in a row. Yeah,
they're terrible.
19-17 loss. They missed the game-winning field goal.
Oh wow!
Dragan
I forgot about that. That was one of the first games of the week.
The reigning Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Year.
Yeah,
missed the game-winning kick, and I thought it was funny because PJ Fleck at Big Ten Media Days said that if you have the Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Year on your team, it means you're not finishing drives.
I know. That's the funniest thing.
And then
I didn't think about that.
Yeah, and he misses the game-winning kick at home.
Yeah,
yikes! And it just seems like Minnesota. You're right, just kind of squeaking by.
Look, they're a team that can make a bowl game just due to schedule. Obviously, big wins, non-conference, big wins, margin of victory-wise, over Rhode Island and Nevada in the non-conference. Pick up 2 against USC, UCLA. Just need 2 more wins, and you get Maryland at home. You go to Rutgers, and you go to Wisconsin. There's 2 winnable games in there. And even go to Illinois now, despite that number next to their name that'll probably be gone.
It should
coming
be
up
gone
here in about 5 hours.
Yeah.
But they were that team last year that snuck into the bowl game. There weren't enough 6-6 teams to fill the bowl. Fill the bowl. So they were the 5-7 team that snuck in, made the Quick Lane Bowl.
The Quick Lane Bowl.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the direction that PJ Fleck is trying to put them in, I don't think it's moving along quite as fast as he would have liked.
Yeah, and it's tough, very tough for Minnesota, I think, going forward. A lot of chaos in the Big Ten, and it's certainly you'd have to think Indiana is going to be involved in that at some point. And we look ahead to Week 8. Oregon going to Purdue on a Friday night, which, some people think it might be a trap game. I don't know. I don't think Purdue, I know, 1 point over Illinois. Purdue obviously has some fight, but Oregon, I think, is just far and away the better team in that game. Nebraska, Indiana, obviously huge. And that, it's going to be I think it's going to be one of the biggest games of the year, considering, the implications. Indiana starting 7-0 for probably the first time since ever. I'm not sure, but hey, that game is going to be unbelievable. Further down the conference, we'll take a look at some of the other matchups coming up. But Indiana, Nebraska coming up 6 days' time. A lot of chaos around the Big Ten. That seems to be the only constant these days. We'll talk more about it on the other side of this break. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on WGCL. On the other side of this hour on IU Sports Sunday, we'll talk more about Indiana in their upcoming game against Nebraska. Real quick, right before the top of the hour, top 25 teams that lost: Utah, Ohio State. A lot of chaos in college football as Ole Miss went down as well. Indiana, Nebraska could be a game between two top 25 teams next weekend when the Huskers come to Bloomington. The Nebraska Cornhuskers, right on the edge of the rankings, dropped out after their home loss to Illinois. But a lot of chaos in the Big Ten. Very, very crowded in the middle. So we'll have Dylan Raiola and Nebraska coming to town next weekend. Should be a very exciting game. Nebraska's fan base always travels really well. Big noon kickoff here for what is the biggest game in Bloomington in 3 years. We'll preview that and other games around the Big Ten next weekend, as well as taking a look at some of the upsets from this past weekend. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on WGCL. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday. Indiana football on a bye week, so they're one of the top 25 teams that did not lose yesterday on what many people were hyping up as one of the biggest days of the year in college football. It certainly lived up to the hype, and the chaos began on Friday night when Utah fell to Arizona State. The Sun Devils 5-1 on the season as they, among many teams, moved conferences prior to this season. Number 16, Utah, losing 27-19 in that one. In the Big Ten, of course, number 2, Ohio State, narrowly falling to Oregon, 32-31. Ohio State had a chance at a game-winning field goal, offensive pass interference, and some mismanagement of the clock down the stretch in that one ultimately did Ohio State in. But it was a very, very close game, about as close as you could ask for. Both teams played, by and large, very well. A couple plays. The difference in the end in that one, Texas dominates Oklahoma, the clear number 1 team in the country, only getting stronger, it seems, with the return of Quinn Ewers, 34-3 in the Red River rivalry. In the Big Ten, of course, going out west and winning. Very tough for some teams this season, but not Penn State, 33-30 over USC in overtime. And the other top 25 team that lost, USC, not ranked, but Penn State barely escaping as the 4th-ranked team in the country. Ole Miss, number 9, goes to Death Valley and struggles at night, like most teams that go there, losing in overtime 29-26 in a thrilling game. But as for the Big Ten, Ben Haller, it's a conference that, as of right now, has at least 3 teams in the college football playoff conversation. You'd certainly think Ohio State is still there, Oregon is still there, and at least by the numbers, Penn State is close. I wouldn't say still, they needed overtime to beat USC. I wouldn't say that they're in the discussion in the way that Ohio State and Oregon are, but they're definitely in the mix. And depending on who you ask, so is Indiana. This is big this weekend because if Indiana gets to 7-0, which they would if they beat Nebraska, you'd certainly have to at least include them more than what a lot of people are doing right now.
Well, it almost feels like there's going to be there might be close to a predetermined number of teams that the Big Ten is going to get into the playoffs. Look, the ACC and the Big 12 are struggling right now. I only see the Big 12 getting 1 team in. The ACC, it depends how Clemson and Miami finish out the years. There's a chance that both of those teams make the playoffs out of the ACC, but you get auto bids from both those leagues. For the sake of argument, let's just say 1 ACC team makes it, and then 1 Big 12 team make it 1 group of 5 team, and then that's 3 automatic bids. Now you got 9 bids left for the SEC and for the Big Ten. Right now, it might be the SEC. I would have thought at first it'd be the SEC getting 6 teams and Big Ten only getting 3. Now the SEC is showing some parity in that teams aren't quite as good as we thought they were going to be. So I think Penn State right now, Penn State is safe in the playoffs right now, obviously, with half the season left to be played. But I just think that Indiana, it helps. Even though they're going to be going up against these teams resume-wise, it helps that they're not playing Oregon or Penn State. The only team in the top 3 that they play this year is Ohio State.
in that Ohio State game, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Tough for Indiana. I mean, you think back to 2020 when Indiana went to Columbus, and that game ultimately, decided Indiana's fate, that they weren't going to go to the Big Ten championship. A couple costly turnovers in the red zone, but Indiana played Ohio State. They gave them everything they had. And, ultimately they fell up short to Justin Fields and the Buckeyes. That was without fans. And it's 100,000 people screaming. I mean, that's a test that Indiana is only going to face once. And I know Michigan State, pretty good atmosphere in East Lansing, but there's a different level to Ohio State. And that game, if Indiana, you especially if you look at what has happened to Washington and to Michigan this season, those games very winnable. Michigan State certainly winnable because Michigan State and Maryland were close, and Maryland didn't look great to say the least against Northwestern at home on Friday night. But I mean, is it really something that you can use to judge a team? Like looking at, okay, well, Michigan lost to Washington, who got blown out by Iowa, who got blown out by Ohio State, who lost to Oregon. Is that really something you can use to judge teams?
I mean, it can't be the only thing you look at, but I think it can be a sorting tool of some sort. I think if there's any sport you can do it, it's college football, just because by far there's even with the amount of parity this year, there still is the least amount of parity in any sport, any of the big sports, college or pro, in the NFL. Or in the college football, there's the least amount of it. So I just think that I think you get a pretty good idea. I think you get a pretty good idea that Indiana's got a really good chance against Washington and Michigan, even with Michigan and Washington being the national championship games last year. Those are games you should win, and those are games that Indiana's going to be favored in. They're going to be favored against Nebraska coming up next week. They're going to be favored against Washington the week after that, no matter what happens in the Nebraska game, most likely. Now, Michigan is just tough to say because we're so far out. You have a road game against Michigan State in between that. But, yes, I do think these are winnable games for Indiana, and I've said it. I have confidence that they should win all three of those games independently. The tough part is, okay, can you really play that well for all three of those games?
With the road game sandwiched in between.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's tough because, every week, teams get more and more film on you. And Northwestern, the one thing that they did well was and Jack Lausch, their quarterback, did a good job of improvising. And it seems like, as these defensive backs, and that's the case just across football, as defensive backs are, forced to cover the receivers for longer and longer, Lausch was able to either find an open man or he was able to create with his legs. So I wonder if maybe that's the blueprint for Nebraska this weekend as they try to take this sellout crowd out of it. And, maybe Dylan Raiola improvises, they run some design scrambles, get him out of the pocket. I mean, he's taken a lot of sacks this year. He's got negative 70 rushing yards, which isn't great.
He also shows that he's not a threat to run the ball at all.
Yeah, and I just wonder, how well are they going to be able to follow what Northwestern did? And even if they do follow that blueprint, Indiana has shown repeatedly that they will go, punch for punch with you. And, okay, you go down, score a touchdown, that's fine. Indiana will score at will. They'll move the ball with ease, and they did that against Northwestern. They've done that really against everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, except Maryland early with a couple turnovers for Curtis Rourke. But besides that, the offense just, once they get going, it's like rolling a boulder down Mount Everest. It's impossible to stop. So it's going to be I think tough for Nebraska's defense. That's the bottom line. But we look at the college football playoff, and you talked about how the SEC, you thought they might get 6 teams in. I mean, realistically, you look at Texas, clear number 1. Should be a lock as of right now. A lot can change, and obviously it probably will. But Texas is a lock for the college football playoff, it certainly feels like. And with the 12-team playoff, even though, Georgia, that heartbreaking loss to Alabama in Tuscaloosa, certainly feels like Georgia has a pretty good shot of getting in, and Alabama, I'm still not sold on. Because, you lose to Vanderbilt, okay, fine, maybe it's a fluke. South Carolina takes you down to the wire. I mean, are we really going to look at Alabama as a team that could, steal a playoff spot at the end of the season? Because some projections last week had them coming to Bloomington for a first-round college football playoff game. I just don't know. I just don't know if Alabama can sustain what they're doing right now and make it to the playoff.
Well, the thing is with Alabama, outside of obviously last night, Oregon's win, Alabama has the best win in the country.
True. Against Georgia.
That home game against Georgia, where they really did look the part.
Yeah.
It is concerning. I really thought they were going to bounce back this week and really handle business against South Carolina. One of the other things, too, we got to start looking at Vanderbilt differently. They're not the worst team in the SEC.
True.
They're not by any means like a playoff contender or a top 25 team at that, but they're a team that is no longer the laughing stock of the SEC. So I don't think if this is 3 years ago and you get beat by Vanderbilt, that's one thing. But this is more of the Ohio State getting beat by middle-of-the-road Purdue. I think Vanderbilt's going to be a very middle-of-the-road SEC team this year. So I don't think the loss is as terrible as it looks. I do think I think you're right. The concerning part is the fact that they didn't come out next week and look good.
Yeah.
They looked flat against South Carolina. But just looking at Alabama's schedule for the rest of the year, Missouri is such a fraudulent top 25 team.
Yeah.
Tennessee is a fraudulent top 10 team. You get that SEC bye week against Mercer. Oklahoma's a fraudulent top 25. I mean, the rest of their schedule is – look, I mean, you have tests in there, absolutely. I mean, LSU is not going to be easy. Tennessee's not going to be easy. Those games aren't easy per se. But it's easier than it looks with all those numbers next to the team's names. I think this schedule – for the rest of the year for Alabama really sets up for them to go to the playoffs. They can lose one more game, I think.
And that's the benefit of the 12-team playoff, is that it's not like with one loss your season's over. And Notre Dame, I think, is a good example of that.
Yeah.
That loss to NIU becomes weirder and weirder every week because NIU, struggled against UMass. And they lost to Buffalo the next week. Notre Dame, though, on the other side, won 4 straight, all in pretty convincing fashion. So the 12-team playoff definitely leaves some room for error, and I think it would be tough for Indiana to get in at 10-2. Not impossible, but it would be very hard for them to get in. And I can't even believe we're having this conversation, Indiana in the college football playoff. But 10-2... for a team with Indiana's resume, I think that's where you'd have to factor in strength of schedule a little bit at least.
It's just it's hard to say right now because once again, this is the first year we're doing it, so we don't have any precedent of I don't know what other teams are going to look like at that point and what you're comparing it to. I still think just a 2-loss Big Ten team, unless the SEC has 6 clear-cut favorite teams or someone in the Big 12 steps up, surprises people, I think at that point, Clemson probably gets in, and then you say, okay, I don't know if Indiana's still a top 3 Big Ten team, but it's still possible depending on what happens with Penn State and actually, I guess just Penn State because I trust both Oregon and Ohio State. Yeah, that Penn State thing's huge. See how they finish the year. I mean, that's really what it's going to come down to, I think. There's no chance and there's no possibility, I think, where the Big Ten only gets 2 teams in. So it's if Indiana could be that 3rd team.
Given that the Big Ten is an 18-team, basically just Super League. I'm not going to say Super League, but they're getting to that point.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny. A little sidebar. The fact that we still call it the Big Ten, there are 18 teams in this conference. I know it hasn't been the Big Ten since 2012, 1990, when Penn State joined. It became the Big 11, I think. It's just funny because the Big Ten, you look at the standings and it's like looking at a CVS receipt. It's massive, but it's certainly interesting to think about the 12-team college football playoff and how Indiana is in the mix. We're talking IU Sports. This is IU Sports Sunday on WGCL. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, he's Ben Howler, I'm Nick Rodecap, and Ben, the time has come for predictions. So Indiana hosting Nebraska this weekend. It's a noon kick, Fox will be here. Big Fox, which is huge. Biggest game in Bloomington in almost 3 years. And you look at the numbers, Nebraska's defense and Indiana's defense both allowing under 20 points per game, among the top defenses in the conference. Indiana's got the edge in the offensive department. Some of that might come from some stat padding, but it certainly is, it looks like on paper anyway, Indiana can score at will better than Nebraska. Dylan Raiola, young freshman, Curtis Rourke, the sixth-year senior, and 2 rushing attacks that are among the best in the league. So I want to ask, what is your prediction for this weekend, given all the chaos of college football and, you know, the high-profile nature of this game?
Well, it is so easy to sit here and look at those stats that you just gave and say that this is going to be a low-scoring game. No, I think it's going to be a higher-scoring game. I think both quarterbacks are going to, I guess, step into the environment a little bit. I think this is the first time that Curtis Rourke will be playing for a truly sold-out Indiana crowd. I think Indiana takes this home in a high-scoring game, 38-34.
38-34. So you think Indiana actually kicks a field goal?
Yeah.
Wow. Now that might be more bold than saying it's going to be a high-scoring game.
Hey, they had one against Northwestern.
If there's one thing Curt Cignetti loves, it's going for it on 4th down.
That is true.
And
telling people to Google him.
And true, he loves Google.
Yes.
And it's, you know, good for him. I mean,
being me.
Yeah. You know, he talked the talk, and he has walked the walk so far. I'm going to go similar. I think it'll be a slugfest, which is surprising because Nebraska's defense is, at least on paper, really good, but games aren't played on paper. I don't know that it's going to be 38-35, though. I think...
Well, that's why I said 38-34.
Oh, 38-30. Oh,
yeah.
Well, yeah, you're right. 38-34. So, oh, man. See, that's tough because I think Indiana does have the edge. But I also think that this is a game that, and it sounds like a cop-out, but this could go either way. I am going to take Indiana, though. I think it's going to be 28-13. I think Indiana's defense dominates. And, you know, there's nothing that defenses like more than a freshman quarterback playing on the road. Because, I mean, Dylan Raiola, correction, that game against Illinois was in Lincoln. And he looked really raw, especially under pressure late in the game. So I think Indiana wins. I think it's, you know, Indiana's defense carries them, kind of like what we saw against UCLA, where they turned defense into offense. So Indiana wins. Dylan Raiola only finds the end zone once, and Indiana goes into Week 8 against Washington, or I guess it'd be Week 9, 7-0. And that is going to be the reality. It's going to be a really fun game. Perfect weather, 65 degrees and sunny at kickoff. We get to a high of like 76. So I don't want to hear any excuses from any fans about how the weather is bad and I didn't want to stay. And hopefully the concession staff doesn't run out of water. But I want to shift now from Indiana football to Indiana football. And by football, of course, I mean soccer. Indiana men's soccer heating up at the right time. And we've kind of talked about, you know, earlier on in the season, they struggled to score. It looked a lot like 2023. They didn't have any true finishers, and it kind of seemed like they were playing themselves out of NCAA tournament contention. But men's soccer, 2-0 this week, now 5-3-5 on the season with a winning record, 3-1-2 in conference play. Big wins over Kentucky. They were down 2-0 against Kentucky at halftime, came back, scored 3 unanswered in the second half. And it's always good for Indiana fans anyway if you beat Kentucky, because that rivalry, very well documented. It seems like Kentucky doesn't want to play Indiana in any higher profile sports anymore because the Hoosiers always take care of business. 2-0 over Penn State on Friday, the defending Big Ten runners-up. Indiana now going to Michigan, to Ann Arbor on Tuesday, and hosting Michigan State, always a very tough competition, on Friday. So is this the part of the season down the stretch when the weather gets cooler or Todd Yeagley starts to heat up? I mean, it seems like it's almost like clockwork at this point, the way the teams just, they get hot at the right time.
Yeah, it is. I don't really know how to explain it either. I mean, this has just been a part of the blueprint of Indiana soccer for the last few years. And it feels like every year they get closer and closer to the edge and closer to being past the point of no return. But there's so many quality opponents on the back end of their schedule that makes it not terribly dangerous yet. Indiana, I think, sitting at about 41 in the RPI right now. You'd love to tick that up a few points. You're probably going to need to at some point, although Indiana's always going to get the benefit of doubt with the branding and who they are when it comes to the selection committee. I don't think they're going to host. I don't think they're going to be a top 16 team. I don't think they're going to bye, but I do think this is a team that can host one of those first round games.
And that's what they did last year.
Yep, exactly. Last year, big win over Lipscomb too. That was a fun game.
Team. Yeah. Lipscomb was a very good team last year, and that was a close game. But Indiana certainly running out of time to sort of push themselves into that conversation as a national seed. I would agree. They've only got 5 games left in the regular season. And the Big Ten last year, it was kind of a down year for everyone.
Yeah.
And the Big Ten was a one-bid league, which, is kind of strange because you look at the powerhouses in the Big Ten. Obviously, Indiana at the very top of that list, but Penn State had a decent year last year. Maryland is right back up in the mix of things this year. They came to Bloomington and beat Indiana in a game that took 2 days, which was weird. But Indiana, after Michigan and Michigan State, will go out to UCLA. They'll host Northwestern. Northwestern also usually very tough competition. And then Trine, the tune-up game before the Big Ten tournament on Friday, November 1st. I wonder, is this... I don't know if it's the year that they break the curse of penalty kicks, but the standard for success for Indiana men's soccer is so high. And it's sometimes like, they... heartbreakers in penalty kicks, but it's late in the NCAA tournament. They always just find a way to turn it on. And guys who are, now veterans, Tommy Mahalik, Sam Sarver, both of them really have been leading the charge. They've had some freshmen make some big plays too. Charlie Hoyer, I believe, had a brace against Penn State, which was huge. Michael Nessie, the game winner against Kentucky. I mean, these guys it's a mix. It's a mix of youth and experience, and I think that is a really good sign. It's not just the same guys, because Mahalik was doing the bulk of the heavy lifting early in the season, but you see some of these freshmen now starting to come into a zone. I think that's a very good sign for Todd Yeagley's bunch as we enter the latter stretch of this season.
I do think we say this every year about this team, and I think, it's one of the reasons that the program's been so consistent, and also maybe a reason why they come on late because of that young talent. You'd think they return a lot of talent, year by year, just because every single recruiting class is one of the best in the countries. So it does make it a little interesting that they always start late like this. But this year's team, I'll tell you what, Tommy Mahalik and Sam Sarver have been playing up top now for so long for this Indiana team. I think that if there's a year to do it, it might be this year. I feel like they've taken advantage of their opportunities a little better in the last few weeks, and that's something that even with the wins came along a season ago and maybe 2 seasons ago, I think that the attack looks a lot better this year than it did last year.
Mahalik only scored twice.
Yeah.
All of last season, including the postseason. He's got 8 goals this season in 13 games, which it's got to be so good for him, because I remember last year it just seemed like he was getting good looks, and either he was getting unlucky, he was whiffing, and you could tell it was weighing on him mentally. So for him to get his mojo back is huge. Sam Sarver leading the way in the assists column. He's got 5. Collins Oduro, who's been a little banged up, a little limited at some points this season, also having a nice year with 2 goals and 3 assists. And then Quentin Elliott, a transfer. Charlie Hoyer, a freshman, also multiple goals. Michael Nessie, a freshman, making an impact as well. And then the veteran JT Harms in goal. Sarver, and Mahalik have kind of been the big 3 for Indiana over their last 2 or 3 seasons. Harms came over from Duke and became the starting goalkeeper in that national runner-up season when they fell to Syracuse. But it does feel like this is sort of like the put up or shut up year for them, and I know how that sounds, but Harms is gone after this year. I think Mahalik and Sarver both, they're seniors. I don't know if they'll have any eligibility left.
I don't think so.
Yeah. because neither of them redshirted. And, like what Joey Mayer did, he ran out of eligibility in Indiana, so he transferred to St. Louis. And you think back to the start of the season, St. Louis, that upset win over IU. And it's just weird because, if they play at the start of the season like they're playing now, if they're playing October quality soccer in August, they're still, a ranked team. They're still in the conversation to be a national seed, but it just seems like they always start flat, which is very strange.
Yeah, the defense has always been consistent year in, year out. This year, that was one of my biggest concerns early on was the defense. I mean, they only have, 3 shutouts, if I'm reading this correctly, this year? Most recent one against Penn State. They had one at Rutgers, and they had one at home against Yale. The thing about the defense, though, is that's usually where we talk about there being returning leaders. I mean, you look at some of the guys that have come in the past. You talked about Joey Mayer. You talked about Daniel Muni a couple years ago. I mean, that's where they've had a lot of their leaders and a lot of their talent coming back. This year was a little different. There was a lot of change on that back line. I think they've handled it well to an extent, but I think there's always going to be new with that. All the experience now is up front and in the attack.
And sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And Indiana, that win against Kentucky, just so impressive because you go down 2-0, it looks bleak. And it was a game where Indiana had more, and this is kind of the blueprint for them. They have more chances, and then the opponent goes completely against the trend of the match and finds the goal first. And sometimes it's demoralizing to try to come back from that because it seems like you're doing everything right. And then you just, you slip up for a moment. I mean, that's what happened against Washington last year. You slip up for just a second and everything goes off the rails. But those veterans have to play such a huge part in that and they've talked about it at length, especially Mahalik and Sarver. We've been here before. We know what it's like to play under pressure. And they've shown that they can be very, very good under pressure this season. So Indiana men's soccer, only a handful of home games left. They'll go to Ann Arbor on Tuesday. That's on Big Ten Network. They face Michigan at 7 o'clock on Tuesday and then return home Friday night, the same night as Hoosier Hysteria, to play Michigan State. And that's interesting because the student section for men's soccer is always phenomenal. But I wonder, I mean, the fans are certainly going to show out in full force, but Hoosier Hysteria going on at Assembly Hall this Friday. A lot of buzz around Indiana men's basketball this year. And I think that's putting it lightly. But they've got all the talent in the world. This is the show me year for Mike Woodson. Not a first or second round NCAA tournament exit. Can't lay an egg in the Big Ten tournament. I think there's going to be a lot of hype around this team. And whether or not they put it on the court, we'll have to see. But, I mean, basketball season's right around the corner. They play Tennessee in an exhibition in just about 2 weeks.
Yeah, this weekend's going to be fun. Look, there's a lot of students in Indiana. I still think Michigan State soccer game's going to get a pretty good outcome. I think that a lot of the soccer fans are kind of niche, returning, die-hard Indiana soccer fans and people that I think will choose soccer over Hoosier Hysteria. And obviously Hoosier Hysteria will have a better turnout. But, I mean, this homecoming weekend, it's going to be fun on IU campus. You haven't really felt this buzz in a long time.
Certainly not while I've been here.
No, we were talking about it. If Indiana basketball could piece together a really good season, a top 25 year, when was the last time you were able to roll a top 25 college football season into a top 25 men's basketball season?
1987?
Something like that.
Because that was the year they beat Ohio State and Michigan in the same year.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're coming off the national championship over Syracuse.
Yeah.
Which, of course, would have happened in April of that year when somebody stole a fish out of the fountain and then never brought it back, if I remember right. But, yeah, I would say it was probably 1987 because Indiana football, of course, really hasn't been ranked since the start of 2021. And they fell out of the polls after getting blown out by Iowa. 2020, Indiana men's basketball was not good. And 2019, they were not ranked, if I remember right. They may have been. No, they weren't. I don't know. But it certainly was not sustained with the basketball team at the same time. So this would almost harken back to, 1987, which I think it goes without saying, neither you or I were around for. But
unfortunately, no.
Just missed the cutoff. Not by much, but a lot to get excited about in Bloomington. And, I mean, between that, men's soccer, always good as well. There's so much to look forward to. As the weather gets colder, Indiana football, Indiana men's basketball, a lot of buzz around both. And we'll talk about it a little more on the other side of this break. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on WGCL. Back here in the studio of WGCL, it's IU Sports Sunday. He's Ben Haller. I'm Nick Rodecap. And Ben, we were talking in the break about Indiana baseball. And I think it's a little bit too early, but they did just play a couple fall exhibitions. And it seems like the walk trouble that they've been plagued by last year is still there. And any thoughts on that very briefly?
Yeah, 2 fall games, obviously, it's very tough to tell anything. It's tough to tell anything offensively, too, because you're going through your progressions as hitters in the offseason, and you're kind of in different spots as a whole offensively. Yeah, the pitching, it's going to be – you're looking for the same things as last year. Is there going to be enough starting pitching? You ran into some trouble last year because it's not that you didn't have good bullpen options, but you had to use so many different bullpen guys that some of them were bound to struggle. And you had some guys who were supposed to have really good seasons who just did struggle last season. But the long way to go, obviously. The walk problems for sure were there. Season starts in February, though. I think they have a lot of time to iron those things out. I think there were some pitchers that didn't pitch who should be coming off injury and should be fine by February. One of the bright spots, though, you did have a few freshmen offensively on the hitting side that looked really good.
A lot of firepower for Indiana, and if you have the chance to come out to Bart Kaufman Field for a game this spring, I know it's a long way away, but you'll see a bona fide first-round draft pick in Devin Taylor, who is one of the most electric hitters in college baseball.
Top 5 draft pick everywhere you look at now.
Yeah.
It's just somebody who, I mean, other teams know who he is. They know how to scout against him. It's just it hasn't mattered.
Yeah.
In the past, I mean, there's a good chance you see 2 first-round picks this year. Tyler Cerny, seen his name thrown around in the first round a few times as well. It's going to be a very good, very exciting lineup. I mean, this team should score a lot of runs.
A lot of firepower for Indiana baseball. We're getting way ahead of ourselves, but it's always fun to look at it.
You want to preview the 2025 Indiana football season?
Oh, man. Well, it's tough because, I mean, Curt Cignetti kind of talked about it, actually, at Big Ten Media Days. He said, we went in and we basically built this team through the portal with a bunch of seniors.
Yeah. Which is so weird.
Yeah.
It's interesting for a first-year coach. It's always about coming in, all right, we'll this year we're not going to be that good. We got to build a program. We got to build a team that's going to last for the future. Cignetti came in the first year. He wanted to win the first year. I mean, I mean it. I know a lot of coaches say this about themselves, but I think it reigns true more for Curt Cignetti than any other coach when he says he just can't handle losing. Like, I don't think that is a possibility in his mind.
Which is, it seems like every coach would struggle to handle losing. But when Curt Cignetti, by, I think, win percentage, is one of the best coaches currently in FBS football. And that's career resume. He's up there with the likes of Ryan Day. And it's crazy. But he talked about with the portal, like, yeah, we're going to have to do the same thing next year. And, I mean, with the season that Indiana is putting together, it's certainly encouraging. If you're looking to maybe put a bow on your career, transfer to a team for 1 year, try to parlay that into maybe a chance to go to the NFL draft. Indiana, it's crazy. But you might be looking at Indiana as a place to do that. I mean, with Curt Cignetti and the continuity that he has with his assistant coaches, and that's big because it's not just the head man. It's the people who you surround yourself with if you're at the top. And he's been very quick to credit his assistants, Mike Shanahan on the offensive side and Bryant Haynes, the defensive coordinator. And with his getting to 6 wins, getting that $500,000 bonus for the assistant pool over the current budget is huge because that means that they're more likely to stick around. And I know a lot of people are like, well, what if Curt Cignetti gets poached? What if his assistants get poached? I don't know that that's going to happen, though. I feel pretty confident that they're going to stay.
The problem you run into is Mike Shanahan and Bryant Haynes are going to get very close to getting head coaching jobs coming at some point here in the near future. I don't know. I don't know who's ahead of who. I mean, they've both done such a good job since they've been here in Indiana. Same discussion we had last week about is this an offensive or a defensive team? I don't know. But the Cignetti thing's interesting. Indiana. I have a feeling that Indiana is a large enough school. It has a good enough culture that when he's that old, this could be the end for him.
And that's kind of what he said. I mean, remember, he's 63 years old. He said that this is going to be his last stop.
Coaches say that all the time, though, and
Jim Harbaugh said he wasn't leaving Michigan.
That. People say that all the time and don't mean that.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't know if I put as much weight into him actually saying that, but thinking about it logically, I think he'd have to get I mean, there's maybe 4 schools that he could get that could see him getting poached by.
Not Notre Dame, no.
Probably not.
No, I especially if they keep, one fluke loss to NIU, not the end of the world for Marcus Freeman. Despite what some people said when the loss happened. It's like, oh, this is their scheduled loss. They're unprepared. They lose to a terrible team.
Yeah, the fire Marcus Freeman calls after that specific game they were a lot more apparent than they are now.
Yeah, and people love to complain when you're doing poorly and then be skeptical when you're doing well.
And the coach is always the easiest first scapegoat in that too.
Yeah, and the lowest common denominator being the coach. It works both ways, and it works against you more often than it works for you. And
right.
I don't know that I really don't think Curt Cignetti's going anywhere. The way he came in and just galvanized this fan base and comes in, goes to Indianapolis and says, I wanted to come up here and see what it looks like because we're going to be back here in December when Indiana's playing in the Big Ten Championship. And people looked at him like he was speaking a different language. And he comes in and he's like, we're going out to the Rose Bowl. It's a dusty old stadium, and we're going to handle business.
That's going to be such an awesome quote if Indiana, because he didn't say they're going to win it. He said they're going to be there.
Yeah.
So if they actually make that, that reminds me of. So this was before this college basketball season, before the 2022-2023 season, when UConn was coming into the season, not a top 25 team by any means coming into the year, and Dan Hurley. Actually, no, it was the year before. It was a random regular season game the year before. They were struck. Or no, I finally got it. Sorry, it took me
It was during like 2020, right?
2020 season, they were a 5 seed. They got upset by 12 seed Mexico State.
Yeah.
Things actually didn't really look great for their future. They just had a bad loss, upset as a 5 seed. And Dan Hurley, the coach of a 5 seed team who has just underperformed year after year after year, said, "You better get us now, because we're coming. We have a national championship coming."
Yeah.
The next season doesn't even come into the season as a top 25 team. Works his way all the way up and runs the table in March, and just did it again a second year. I'll tell you something different about the coaches with confidence.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because I remember when Dan Hurley said that. And everybody looked at him like, yeah, okay, sure. That's just you're coping and you're trying to, maybe save your job or something. And then he comes in and he talks the talk, and I think it's safe to say that UConn they're unbelievable.
Can't walk more of the walk.
Yeah, and right I know Dan Hurley is kind of crazy, but crazy works sometimes.
Sometimes.
And, he turned down the coaching job in L.A. with the Lakers, and he came back. And it's so tough, especially in basketball, because it's not like the NFL in college football. You can't go one and done in college football. So if you have a star player, you're going to have them, assuming you recruited them out of high school, you're going to have them for at least 3 years. But in college basketball, you're good. You're one and done. Mm-hmm. Or if you're Khalil Ware, you're not good, and then you come to Indiana and you become a first-round pick, and now Brian Windhorst is talking about you like you're the steal of the draft, which is crazy, but also bodes well for Indiana's recruiting. Because if you want to play in the NBA, it's certainly a compelling case that Mike Woodson could make. But, yeah, I think Dan Hurley is, could you compare him to Curt Cignetti? If Indiana sustains this success, it would take multiple years.
Yeah, for that comparison, I'd have to. But then again, it's kind of the same track, right? Dan Hurley was very good at Rhode Island, didn't lose much at Rhode Island. Comes to UConn, a team that was struggling when he got there. And, look at him now.
Yeah, it's incredible. I wonder, with UConn basically being a bona fide NBA team, if they can sustain that again, because it's so hard. But definitely an interesting blueprint to follow for UConn. And while we have a little bit of time left here, I want to shift. Indiana men's soccer had a tough start to the season, and now they're starting to trend in the right direction as the clock winds down. But Indiana volleyball, we always knew it was going to be tough for them. They scheduled difficult, and they were hoping that maybe they could steal a couple wins against ranked teams to get themselves into the at-large conversation. But for them, time is running out, and the schedule certainly does not get any easier, kind of like football in a lot of ways. It only gets tougher from here on out for Indiana volleyball. Their problem has not been at home this season. They're 7-0 at home, 2-6 away from Wilkinson Hall, which puts them at 9-6 on the year. And they're 0-4 against teams receiving votes in the polls, in the top 25 poll. They're just coming off a game where they were swept at Minnesota. They've got Penn State today on the road.
That's going to be an interesting one.
Penn State, one of the best teams in the country.
No, that's a home.
It is at home.
Yeah.
So I beg your pardon. That makes it a little bit easier because they're undefeated at home, but still Penn State, a top 5 team, a national championship contender, it seems like every year. And then they go to West Lafayette. And Purdue took Nebraska to 5 sets a couple nights ago in Lincoln, which is very impressive for them. Purdue, another perennial contender at the top of the Big Ten. It seems like Indiana volleyball is sort of running out of chances. It seems like they're going to need to steal maybe not even one, but maybe 2 matches, I should say, against ranked teams, which is very difficult to do. And it's tough for them because they're so good at home, but the gap between good and great in Big Ten volleyball is just so big.
Yeah, there's just a big hump they're trying to get over. It is interesting how difficult they schedule when they're already playing in the toughest conference in the country for volleyball. And you don't have a conference tournament. So you really are relying, everything's about an at-large bid. They're all at-large bids. And I guess the one way to look at it is the only way you get in is, you look at it like this. You're probably not going to win a lot of games because you're playing a lot of really good teams. Big Ten schedule's tough. So the only way you get in is you play really tough teams and just try to get as many good wins as possible. But it's just tough to collect them, especially when you're playing this many away from home.
And that is a tough task ahead for them to try to make it to the NCAA tournament, a place they haven't been in 15 years. Which is difficult. I mean, Steve Aaron building a great program here. He's got some All-American talent on the floor, but I don't think that they're going to be able to string it together this year, unfortunately. A lot of unforced errors are what kind of hurt them, allow subpar teams to hang around and allow the good teams to run away, because that's really what it's all about in volleyball. You keep momentum, you build it, you take advantage of the mistakes when your opponent makes them, and then you run away. But that's all the time we have this Sunday morning. Indiana football, of course, home this weekend against Nebraska. It's sold out. So if you can find a ticket somewhere, good luck. If you can, get to Memorial Stadium. If you can't, then that's all right. You can tune in, listen to the game, watch the game, just experience it one way or another, because this is unprecedented times in Bloomington. It's homecoming. The weather's going to be perfect. The leaves are going to start to change, and it's a great place to be. And Ben, I know I'm looking forward to it. I hope you're looking forward to it as well. It's going to be fun. But that's all the time we have on this Sunday morning. Indiana sports in a very good spot right now, and that'll do it for us on IU Sports Sunday. He's Ben Haller. I'm Nick Rodecap. We hope you have a good rest of your Sunday morning and afternoon.